Well, it's a pleasure to be here in this school. I recognize some faces from previous schools, so it shows that this activity is something that we should continue to persuade. And I would like to present you a little bit of the history, of the recent history of the science policy interface and how this has been developed at the highest level, at the global level. So, in the beginning, what we had was always scholars producing science, publishing their results, and then expecting that politicians and decision makers would use those results. So this was at the beginning of the things. The first result of, at the international level, of this interaction between scientists and policymakers was the establishment of the Man and Biosphere Program by UNESCO in 1969. This is a very strong program. It's still running. It's a program that is responsible for the establishment of the biosphere reserves and still establishing quite a lot of the decisions about it. Brazil, although was part of MAB since it was established in '69, only in '92, Brazil joined their Biosphere Reserve Program. And the first reserve that was established was the Atlantic Forest Reserve that covers all the domain of the Atlantic Forest, so from the northeast to the south of the country to the border with Paraguay. And this was a major step because it was done on the transition, on the first elected president after many years of the military government. So this was showing that Brazil was trying to move from a position that everything that was related to environmental protection was of national security. So we would not allow any country to establish any rules in our protected areas. Under biosphere reserves, you have a lot of rules that are established for the global reserves. Unfortunately, although we had other reserves that were established, one in the Amazon, one in the Pantanal, those never really were established and functionally as the Atlantic Forest one that is very well established as a council, has publications, it's working and producing a lot of information. The second moment when we had an intense exchange of information produced by science and worries about the planet or the health of the planet at the highest level, at the UN level, was the Stockholm meeting on environment and people in 1972. And this was very important because it established some decisions, the Stockholm Declaration, but it also established UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Program, that today is UN Environment. It's called the UN Environment. And with the decision that this would leave the tradition of having only those agencies being established in the Northern Hemisphere. So UNEP was established in Nairobi. This was a move that UN was doing to move out from having everything in the North. That movement started and stopped there. All the other agencies that were established have their base on the Northern Hemisphere. In '72, you have to remember that Brazil was under a very strong military government that started in '64 and got very, very hard, very restricted in '68. And in '72, the position of the Brazilian government at Stockholm is that the worst pollution was misery. So we needed to develop the country, we needed to accept all kind of industry, doesn't establish rules or worries about if they are polluting the air or not, if they are generating jobs. And afterwards, we see how we solve the environmental problems that we establish. So this ended up with situations like Cubatão. I don't know if you all know this. Cubatão is a city near the sea, near Santos. It's a city where there's enormous petrochemical plant established that's highly polluted the air. It destroyed the Atlantic forest on the mountains because you have always the wind coming from the sea to the plant and then throwing all the pollutants into the forest. And it was a major disaster. But that was our position in '72. And we ended up as the big villains of environment in '72 because we were also responsible for the Amazon forest and we were destroying, at that time, we were destroying the Amazon forest. As I said, at the global level, we had the establishment of UNEP. At the Brazilian level, as a response of this sort of bad way that all other countries were looking at Brazil, that we had no regards for the environment, the military government established the Special Secretary for the Environment, SEMA, and the first and permanent secretary was a professor of biology from the University of São Paulo, Dr. Paulo Nogueira Neto, that worked there from '73 to '86 and had a major contributions on the establishment of some kinds of conservation units, protected areas that were for research, were ecological stations. They were not open to public visitation. They were declared for research. I recommend for those that read in Portuguese to read his diary. He died a few years ago, but he left a diary that tells day by day. He was a lawyer by formation because the family wanted him to be a lawyer. But then he went to do biology after doing law, he did biology and became one of the biggest specialists in Brazilian native bees, the Miliponini, and then became the State Secretary of Environment. So the diary is really something worthwhile. After some years from Stockholm, countries were still worried that the environment was being degraded and that we were overusing resources. And then the UN established the Brundtland report. Brundtland was the Prime Minister of Norway, and she was the head of a large team of scientists from all over the world that from '83 to '87 visited all countries, discussed it with NGOs, discussed it with scientists, discussed it with governments, and wrote a report that is called Our Common Future. You probably came across that. If you haven't, another thing that is worth reading. And it's also important that it was the first time that the term sustainable development was used. So it started there, the idea that we need to use our resources in a way that we wouldn't compromise the possibility of future generations to also use them. So this started in '87, and during this development of this report, and in '87, when the report was ready, the popularity of the report sort of moved. It was a sort of way of pushing up the movement in terms of defending the environment. So a lot of NGOs, some of them that were already existing, started to be much more active. And Brazil was still being seen as a villain because of the destruction of the Amazon forest. The next step that's important to recall here at the Brazilian level, but also at the global level, is that in '88, Brazil approved a new constitution. This constitution was started in '87. It was approved in '88 by the Constituency Assembly, and it was the first constitution in the world that had a chapter related to environment. So we have a chapter that it's established a lot of rules for environment, like the previous impact studies for large enterprises, the necessity of having a system of protected areas, the necessity of having some of the biomes treated that of special care, the Amazon, the Atlantic forests. So this was unique in terms of bringing the environment at this level. So joining this with the result of the Brundtland report, and looking at what was happening in the world, that there was a lot of worries about possible interference of man, of human activities in climate. In '88, the UN established the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. So you see that there was the looking at the environment and treating the environment in a different way was not only a global movement, but it also have resonance on countries like Brazil. So the first IPCC report came out in '92, and as you all know, the last one came out 2 years ago, or last year, as a complete report. So you have a long history of following what's happening with the atmosphere, mainly because there were very few variables that you have to measure, and all those variables were the same despite the country, the continent, wherever we were in the world. So we were always looking at the emission of greenhouse gases, CO2, methane, and other gases. You were always looking to the increase in the temperature of the sea, the temperature of the air. So it doesn't matter if below that atmosphere you had a forest, you had a big city, or you had the ocean. At this same time, because of the pressure, international pressure, about the deforestation of the Amazon, we took a lot of decisions inside Brazil. We call it the green package of the Sarney government. It established IBAMA, that you all know, this is the Institute for Protection of the Environment. That was a merger of that Environment Secretary created in '72 and the Brazilian Forestry Development Institute. We also have a cooperation treaty signed by the 8 countries that are part of the Amazon region. And to try to show good intentions in relation to the environment, Brazil presented a candidacy to receive the UN Conference on Environment in '92. That is the ECHO 92 or the Rio 92 or the Earth Summit of '92. That was a very important point in our history. So, what was approved in '92? I'm not going through everything that was discussed and approved. It was a very large conference. It was the conference that brought the larger number of state representatives, say presidents, first ministers, kings, queens, so on. We had 118 head of countries present in Rio at one stage. And it approved the Convention on Biological Diversity, the one on climate change, the one on combat desertification. We also have the Rio Declaration, where the precaution principle we established, and we have an agenda that was an action plan for sustainable development on the 21st century, and the establishment of GEF. Because if you are going to do everything that you are promising here, you need money from some source. And this source was the World Bank, and the World Bank established a branch that is dedicated to the environment. So, there's a lot of things that were happening, as I said, outside Brazil and inside Brazil. And these conventions are the most important documents in the environment that we have. Again, they are a kind of bringing together the knowledge available with politicians and try to have a common wording for a convention. There are a few things that we have to remember. Any document approved by UN must be approved by all countries. If one single country is against, it's not approved. So that is why the language changes from sometimes a very strong recommendation that comes from the scientific part and becomes a much weaker recommendation when it's approved by the politicians, because you need a language that everyone can approve. The other thing that is important to remember is that at that time, UN had a more strong position in the world than it has today. Today, because of the wars, because of the inability or incapacity to intervene in wars, and UN is losing some of its position, but at that time, it was very strong. The second thing that is extremely important for us is that for the first time, on the preparation from 1990 to 92, UN organized 4 meetings in preparation to the Rio meeting. Along this meeting, for the second meeting, the first was in Nairobi, the second meeting was in Switzerland. For the meeting in Switzerland, for the first time, UN allowed NGOs to attend the meetings. You don't speak, you don't vote, but you can be there hearing, and mainly, you can be there on the corridors with the delegations, with whom you can speak, with whom you can put some pressure against or in favor of some points. And this started there, and it's the way it goes until today. Today, they try to show that it's a bit better because the NGOs can speak. Can speak, this means that the NGOs elect one person that on the opening of the session will speak for 5 minutes. And will speak for 5 minutes in the closing session. The rest of the time, you don't participate. You're just there hearing, as I said. So remember, I've shown just before that IPCC was established before 92, in 88. So when the Convention on Climate Change was approved, you knew already what would be the entity responsible for putting together all the scientific knowledge generated in a frame time, usually 4 years, put them all together, and you synthesize that for the politicians to work on the document that will be approved by the convention. So you are producing the scientific basis for the decisions of the convention. And for the Convention on Biological Diversity, we didn't have anything. We didn't have anybody responsible for that. So they've established, sorry, I thought I had another slide here. They've established inside, as part of the convention, a subsidiary technical body, SPSAS, that would be the science that would be produced for supporting the decisions of the convention. Well, it didn't work. It didn't work because to be part of the convention, usually these persons come from the Ministry of External Affairs. So they are not scientists. They are not producing science. They are not putting together all the science produced in the subject and producing a synthesis. Sometimes SPSAS did it as contracts they made with some international bodies. But it was not something regular like the IPCC. So it took, sorry, can spear. It took 10 years when we had the Rio Plus 10 conference in Johannesburg in 2002, the countries realized that SPSAS was not working. So it took 10 years. And then something should be established to do the same work as IPCC for biodiversity. There was one proposition in 2006, 2007 by the French government that was not endorsed by developing countries because all the bonus of environment stayed with the North and all the expenditure on preserving the environment, mainly biodiversity, was in the South. Obviously couldn't be adopted. And then it started a process that ended up in the establishment of BPBES. And you see, it took another 10 years. So for 20 years, you had every 4 years a report from IPCC on climate change. And you didn't have anything on biodiversity. In 2012, when IPBES was established, it was established to provide policy-relevant knowledge on biodiversity and ecosystem service for decision makers. So it was during this long process, we were, in terms of biodiversity, we were losing space, both in the media and in the heart of people, because everything they heard about environment was always related to the change on climate. And if you probably read this many times in the news, that the 92 report of IPCC start by saying that it's possible that human activities, emissions of CO2 is changing the atmosphere. And it took 20 years for a report to say it is due to human activities that we have this increase. But we didn't have anything in terms of biodiversity. So IPCC started late, 20 years later, but started running. It was established based on the experiences of IPCC. You have the plenary as the major organization inside BPBES. The plenary is composed by the representatives of the countries that are affiliated to BPBES. I think today we have 138 countries that are affiliated to BPBES. So you have representatives of those countries that will vote, they will discuss decisions that are based in assessments that are produced by the community the scientific community. And to ensure that this would go this way, IPCC start this multidisciplinary expert panel. So here you have 25 experts, 5 from each geopolitical region recognized by UN, so 5 from GRULAC. GRULAC is South America, Central America, Caribbean. You have Africa, it's obviously the African state. So these are geopolitical regions that are recognized. You have 5 from each. We are there not representing our country or our region. We are there because of our scientific knowledge. It's the multidisciplinary expert panel that writes the research program of BPBES. What will be the next assessments that will be done? Countries will appoint experts to be part of the team of experts that will write those reports. It's the MAP who select among those appointed the ones that will really write, looking how is in a balance of gender, balance of regions, ethnic balance. So it's completely different from having a group of persons that's selected by the IPCC itself to put together all the information on biodiversity, on climate change, and then produce a report. Here you are, our Brazilian platform, every time there is a call for nominations, we nominate experts for this. It's difficult to have an expert nominated by an NGO as part of the team, the final team that's going to write. Yes, it is, because 80% of the places are taken by the countries. We have only 20%. And we have 20% because this was a very, very tough fight to establish, because 2 countries, when BPBES was being established, wanted no place for NGOs to nominate endpoints. So 20% was the maximum that it was possible to reach. And it works. You have people that are representing. So this multidisciplinary, we established a conceptual framework where you have nature, and you see here that it's written in black, in green, and in blue. Black is the denomination for, is the UN language. Biodiversity and ecosystems is the research language. And Mother Earth is the indigenous and traditional people language. So in its framework, in its conceptual framework, IPCC is saying already that traditional and indigenous knowledge matters, and we want to take that up. We are not going to do like IPCC, that only papers published in English in high-impact journals are considered for that summary that they produce then for the policymakers. IPCC, right from the beginning, wants to take all systems of knowledge, inequality, and bring this together. It's not easy. I don't think we've accomplished that. We are in a good way, but it's still fighting and struggling to get it better. And then we very, very fast started to produce some assessments. Assessments that we thought as low-hanging fruits, pollination and food production. There was an enormous amount of information in all continents. You had very good research teams in all continents. So it was just to bring those people together and produce a very solid assessment. So this was produced in 3 years. It was one of the fastest that was produced by IPBES. Then we also had the ones that were geographic. For instance, we have the one for the Americas. Here, Americas goes from Alaska to Patagonia, where is Christiana, and it includes Greenland. Because Greenland was nowhere, so you had to put somewhere. They decided it was part of the Americas as well. Then we had the global. That was the one you probably heard a lot, because it said it in 100 years, 1 million, until the end of the century, 1 million species will probably disappear. I've asked where was Cristiano, because he was one of the co-chairs of this assessment. As a Brazilian was a co-chair of the pollination assessment. So there was representatives of developing countries, not only on the team that was writing, but also on the teams that were coordinating the writing. And one of the most recent ones is the one on invasive species. And if you look at those assessments, they are that thick. They have, the shortest one have 500 pages. The longest one, I think, have more than 1,000. Well, guys, you are kidding. You say that you are producing science for policymakers to take in account for decision. Do you think any policymaker will read 600 pages? Yeah, sure. All the members of parliament do this, and I know. But just in case they don't, for each of these assessments, we produce a summary for policymakers that usually is 20 pages. We have one there. That brings the main points. I was referring to the assessment itself. So it says that it's well known that pollination is important, economically important, so on, based on C chapter, so. So it's always related, and it has all these major points. And even to make it a bit easier, they usually start with an executive summary that are 2 pages where you pinpoint what is the most important thing that is in that summary. We think that 2 pages is not too much for a politician or for an aide of a politician to read, and it's there where you have to sell, they have to buy the importance of that assessment, and then they will read the rest and understand and start to use that. So we started here in this phase, and we moved to here, where there is an interaction, because when you have plenary, or even out of plenary, you are always discussing with the politicians how far you can go, how strong the language can be. It might sound like a joke, but when you're negotiating a summary like that one, you negotiate it word by word. And every country there must agree. If somebody doesn't agree, you have to change to another word. It will say the same, probably in a not so strong way. But you have a basis there for policy. So I think we are here in this stage where the best we can reach is co-production, where you really discuss and you write your research project together with the politicians, and these are where things are going. This is just an indicative of what's on the plate. So BPBES is finishing this Nexus assessment, is finishing this transformative change assessment. These two assessments should be approved in the next plenary that happens in Namibia at the end of this year. And then you have the other ones that are online. The second global assessment, nature's contribution to people, special planning, so things that are already listed, approved by MAP as important to be on the line to have assessments. But BPBES doesn't have only the function of producing assessment. This is the most known phase of BPBES. But BPBES also have an area of knowledge generation. Remember, BPBES is not doing research. How you have knowledge generation? You have knowledge generation at minimum when you're appointing gaps of research, areas where you need more information. It produces policy support tools, and it has a program of capacity building. This is what I was most involved with BPBES since BPBES was established, the establishment of a task force on capacity building. I've been a member of that task force until last year, so we've been there for almost 10 years, and it's running and it's improving and going very well. Well, based on the experience of BPBES, we decided, considering the number of Brazilians that were being part of the different assessments of the MAP, of different task forces, that we had enough people to produce a Brazilian report on a Brazilian assessment on biodiversity and ecosystem services. This is, BPBES is looking at the global level. The maximum it comes down is to regional, like the Americas, like Africa. But it will never look at a country. It's out of the mandate. And it's rightly so. I mean, the country is sovereign about its biodiversity. So we established this officially in 2007, although we started to work in 2015. We've produced the first assessment in 2019, assessment and the summary for policymakers, following exactly the system that BPBES. And then also we produced one on climate change and biodiversity, pollination, water, restoration. And we started to work on one on IOK and biodiversity. But this took much longer. In the end, it was published by Manuela Carneiro and her team in the page of the Brazilian Society for the Progress of Science, because it was completely different from the assessments we were doing. But we have an assessment. We have these three ongoing, coastal and marine. We decided that we didn't look at the coastal and marine area in the detail it deserves, and this is always the case in these global assessments. So we did one focusing on that. It was launched last year in November. We did one on invasive species that was launched on March this year, and we're finishing one on agriculture and biodiversity that should be launched in July. But I think that we are in a crossroad in terms that we know politicians and decision makers needs information. We are producing information. In some cases, we are talking to each other and seeing what kind of information, what way it should be presented. And the way it presented is particularly important. Just give one quick example. When we started the Biota program, we started an information system of everybody that was collecting samples in the state of São Paulo had to do it following 9 fields that were mandatory. Doesn't matter if we're working with microorganisms, birds, or forests. You have to get those points there. And we are naive to think that all that information is there, freely available to the decision maker. So the decision maker can consult our database and take decision. Who has the time? These guys are always running after the fire, trying to put the fire off. They don't have time to get in the system, look all the species in a single place. And so 8 years after we started this bank, we sat with people from the government, with NGOs, and we decided to transform that information in a map of priority areas of conservation, and we concluded that in the state of São Paulo, conservation was not enough. We needed also restoration, so the priority areas for conservation and restoration. This is a tool that a policymaker can use. And this is being used by the state secretary or by the government of the state of São Paulo for the establishment of policies on environment since 2008. So we have to understand that. And this needs, there are different ways that countries are doing this, how they can get the science and the decision maker. In UK, for instance, you have a chief scientific advisors. So in each ministry, you have a scientist that is there to feed the minister with scientific information, to call attention to problems, to bring matters to discussion. It's one way of doing it, and you have one chief that is on the top of them. You have the diplomacy science service from the European Union. It's another way of doing. But when you're talking about diplomacy science, you are looking to one specific set of situations. Diplomacy science implies that these trained people will work on negotiations with other countries. You have a lot of problems that are within the country. So how do you make the politicians within the country talk to scientists? And you have even research agents like the Beaumont Forum that makes calls that bring together the major research agencies funding from all over the world. And it's making calls of projects of research that is both basic and applied. It must involve different stakeholders. So this is, for this you need teams to do. The BPBES was one of the first to start this, training people on the capacity building task force. We established a fellowship program. So for each assessment, for each chapter in each assessment, there would be at least one, ideally 3, so far we managed to get 2, young person, nobody, generally at the level of postdoc, that will be working with the scientists of that chapter and will be trained to do these conversations with politicians. So it's a way of starting to train young people like you to work on this area. Obviously, the Brazilian platform copied it, right? But as we don't have money, this has to be done in a voluntary basis. And I'm proud to say that we have 42 young researchers working on the different chapters of the different assessments that we are running. And almost in the end of our work program, we we managed to get some money, and some of them are now being paid as well. So we're not exploring them. And there are some initiatives. The oldest one is SPSAS, that have an area of science diplomacy that train people, and it's very active, and it's very good. It's running very well. And you have some new ones, like the Inter-American Institute for Global Change, INI, that created the STEP program, Science, Technology, Policy Fellowship Program, that started to run 4 years ago. And we have training for everything. Here is, again, you're looking to only one set, that is the negotiation part. Here you are looking to everything. And I'm glad to say that some of the young researchers working on the chapters of the Brazilian platform were accepted in this program and did this program. One of them is Alice. I don't know where she is at the moment. There in the end. And the one that just went out, Juliana. Juliana was one of the first EPIS fellow on the regional assessments. So you see that these people go on working with this. Well, this is what I wanted to present you. I'm here for you to answer questions, and I think there's a lot of points that we can discuss. And thank you very much.